Hey, BernieDawg here. This is an Optimus 111B stove, and we're going to be taking it apart. Now, first, a little 101 on this sort of stove, or virtually any other stove. Basically, you have two systems here, and each one has two functions. On this side, we have the burner, and the burner's two functions are to vaporize the fuel in the head of the burner and also to meter the fuel by using the spindle valve, which controls how much fuel vapor comes out of the jet. Now, on the other side, we have the tank, and the tank has two functions also. One, obviously, is to hold the fuel, to act as a fuel reservoir. The other is to provide pressure so that the fuel can be driven through the systems and into the burner so that you can vaporize it and then have vaporized fuel to run your stove. So the best way to proceed when you're going to work on one of these is to separate the two components and work on each individually, and that's what we're going to do next. The feed tube nut on this particular model, this particular example, is about 16 millimeters. The feed tube nut can vary in size depending on what year the stove was made and what particular model of 111 you have. I don't have a 16 millimeter, but I do have a 5/8, which is almost identical to a 16 millimeter, and I'll be using that. If you don't have a 16 millimeter wrench for your stove or whatever size you need, you can always use a quality adjustable wrench like this one to do the work, but just be real careful. So I'm holding down the tank real firmly and lifting the burner part so there's no chance of tweaking anything as I remove or loosen the nut in a counterclockwise direction. The customer sent me the stove with the mounting bolts in place on the tank. I'm going to go ahead and remove those. The customer has also repainted their box, and I'll show you a picture of what that looks like. These mounting bolts are threaded 1/4 inch by 20 threads per inch. I'll set those aside, and the next step is to go ahead and remove the fuel cap. This cap is an SRV or safety release valve style cap. The gaskets in here, the gasket and pip need to be refreshed for safety reasons. I have a whole video about that. There's a cap seal right here that you can see, and inside here there is a little rubber pip that needs also to be replaced so that it can release any pressure if the tank becomes overpressurized. Next step is to go ahead and unscrew the pump cap and remove the pump from the pump tube of the stove. Now, if it's stuck, use some Croil on it to loosen it up. Couple different kinds of styles of pump. This one has a leather cup, and there are also pumps that have a rubber O-ring. This one is not in the greatest shape. Some of the leather's torn off, and I'll be replacing it. So we'll set that aside. Inside the pump tube down at the very end is an NRV, or non-return valve. Non-return valve is a British term. In America, you'd call it a check valve or a one-way valve. The non-return valve in the bottom of the pump tube allows air to be pumped into the tank, but has a spring-loaded seal, which once the air has gone into the tank, the spring-loaded seal closes to keep any fluids or air or anything inside the tank from coming back out of the tank. Very important that this work correctly. Now that NRV that's down at the bottom of the pump tube needs a special tool for removal. It's called an NRV wrench. Here's a couple that I have, and here's a photo or two of some others. The slot on an NRV tool is 5 millimeters wide and 4 to 5 millimeters deep. You can make your own out of an old bolt. If you want to use some penetrant to make the NRV easier to remove, reach inside the tank with a small brush and apply the penetrant to the pump tube so it can run down to the threads of the NRV. The head of the NRV seals, so there's no point in sticking it down the pump tube. That won't help you at all. Put the penetrant on the outside of the pump tube, which you can see right there in the tank, not the opening of the pump tube, but right there, and that will help you remove your NRV. So I'm going to take a NRV tool and put it down the pump tube, and I'm going to use a lot of force towards the tank and towards the wrench to go ahead and unscrew that NRV from the tank. Like that. Yep, that's what you want to do. Apply force that direction. Otherwise, the head of the tool may skip off the head of the NRV and cause damage. So there's the NRV. And this one does not have a gasket on it. It should have a gasket on it. All NRVs should have gaskets on their head. Traditionally, lead was used. I'm not a big fan of lead, but you can use lead if you wish. I think that low-density polyethylene works better. It's a type of plastic. You can make it from food container lids. LDPE, low-density polyethylene plastic NRV heads, do not get stuck in pump tubes. However, lead ones can. If you have one that has a lead gasket and it just won't come out, it's probably because the lead has spread into the threads and is hung up down there, even after you've unthreaded it. You can use a pair of these alligator forceps, also known as ear forceps, available on eBay for not too much money, to go ahead and grab the head of your NRV and pull it out of there. Usually it's not too hard. Or, if you like, you can use a little compressed air, just right there. That's right in the filler. Make sure you point it down or put a rag over the end so your NRV doesn't go missing somewhere in your shop. So the three things that need to be taken care of with the tank is 1, maintenance the NRV, 2, maintenance the fuel cap, and 3, maintenance the pump cup on the pump. So that's it for rough disassembly of the tank. I'm going to take these parts and put them in just an old yogurt container. If you have a parts bin, it's good to keep all your parts together so you don't lose anything. Now, next step is to get to work on the burner. That's our other part. And first step is just to go ahead and unscrew the spirit pan. If you have one with a slot, that's great. You can use a tool. You can make a tool out of an old screwdriver that has a broken bit to it. You can file a groove in the bottom of it, and that'll help you to remove it. Or you can do what I did and take a piece of strap iron and make your own custom tool, which will fit directly into the slot that is usually on most of these spirit pans, but not all of these spirit pans. Right at this location, you should find a gasket. The gasket keeps the spirit from leaking out the bottom of the spirit pan. Next, we want to remove the roll of brass mesh, which is in the feed tube of the burner. It's a tight roll. You can use a dental tool, easily found on eBay or through other vendors on the web, that'll help you get it started. You want to pull that out of that feed tube, unroll it, and clean off any carbon with a brass bristled brush. You can use some Coleman fuel to help you clean it, as kind of acts as a solvent for some of that carbon that's on that screen. You want to get that screen nice and clean, and later on, after it's clean, we'll roll it back up and put it back in there. Next, I want to remove the jet from the burner, and I've found that just the wrench that comes with most of these stoves works just as well as pretty much anything else for removing the jet. So you may have to flip it over repeatedly and angle it differently, and it's just kind of a pain, and that's what you have to do to get the jet out. Once it's loosened, it comes out a lot easier, and if you can get your fingers in there, especially on the 111B that only has 2 up tubes into the burner head, it really makes it easy to just use your fingers rather than trying to wrench it off the whole way. Okay, so got it loosened up and just finished spinning it off with the fingers. There's the jet. I'm going to set that one aside. The next thing to do is to take the control knob and put it on the spindle and turn it counterclockwise so that we can get the cleaning needle to drop out. There's the cleaning needle. Then you can take an adjustable wrench or even use the little tool that came with the stove to remove the spindle nut. Okay, there's the spindle nut. So after this, then I'm going to take the control knob again and screw the spindle out of the stove housing, the burner housing. So here's the spindle, and the spindle has multiple parts on it. There's a graphite, there's a little metal ring. There's the graphite. This is the metal ring. And then the way it works is that the spindle nut squishes the graphite against the ring. And take a look at that. Okay, the ring is on the left with the worn out graphite in the middle, and then the spindle nut is on the right side of the graphite. So we've got the spindle nut, we've got the graphite, and we've got the little ring. Now, the little ring is dished on the side that touches the graphite, and that's important to get that orientation right. So you can see the dish side of the ring here, and then here is the flat side of the ring. So when you have it on here correctly, the flat side goes against the teeth and the dish side goes away from the teeth. So I've got this burner that I'm going to clean. It's got lots of crud, some old polish residue all over it. It just looks ugly, and I'm gonna try to clean this up and some of the other parts. Let's take a look at those parts so you can get an idea of a before I end this portion of the video. I've got the burner, which needs to be cleaned. Get all that crud off of there. Also the screen, which needs to be scrubbed with a wire brush and some solvent. The spindle assembly will need to be cleaned up. And I need to clean up the windshield, which is showing a lot of rust and crud, and we'll clean that up too. Lastly, we have the heat shield, which came wrapped in aluminum foil. I'm not real sure what's under there. I'm going to unwrap it. Yeah, it looks pretty good under here, but it could probably use a good polish, so that's what I'm going to be doing too. I hope you enjoyed this part of the video, this first part, and learned something about how to take apart the stove. I'm going to be back with a second installment where I clean the parts and get them all back together and reinstall them on the stove. Stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching.